So the Zuffa boxing era is officially underway as of now. As of last night, we saw Zuffa boxing kick off with their first event in the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. If you're not familiar with Zuffa boxing, this is Dana White's boxing promotion, his boxing company. I think he's trying to kind of run it how the UFC is and make it its own separate boxing league. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But if you are new to this channel, because this is only like my third video that I've ever posted, I do want to let you guys know this is not a deep breakdown. This is not going to be a channel that goes super deep into these matchups, into the fights, but I want to kind of give my thoughts and opinions on this first event and some of the other events that are coming up as well. So, like I said, don't expect massive breakdowns. Don't expect deep dives and deep breakdowns. Just my thoughts and opinions. And we're also going to break down some matchups that are, like I said, coming up on the way. And we'll be giving like some predictions and stuff for these upcoming events in these next few videos. So if you do enjoy that type of content, at the end of this video, if you do enjoy this, I greatly appreciate if you do consider subscribing to the channel. I greatly appreciate everybody who does watch this. And let's get straight into it. Like I said, Dana White and Zuffa boxing is now official. It is now a real thing, which kind of feels surreal to me. When Dana White first started talking about this, you heard kind of rumblings about it years ago, like several years ago. You've heard these rumblings of Zuffa boxing. You've seen Dana White wearing the Zuffa boxing gear and stuff. This goes way back. And it's finally in fruition. Like, it's a real thing now, and it feels crazy. Like, when I was sitting there watching it, it just felt weird to see Zuffa boxing inside that ring. It felt, I don't know. It felt very different, I would say. Very different. But I do want to come on here and give my honest thoughts and opinions. So, we're just going to break down whatever bugged me, whatever I liked. And this is no offense, because look, this is Zuffa's first event. Did I expect it to be perfect? No, I did, absolutely not. It doesn't matter if he owns UFC. It doesn't matter any of that. Nothing of that matters. This is the first event in a whole new league. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to see growth as this goes, and I will say that. So if anybody does get offended, then I'm sorry for offending you, but this is not the point. I just want to give my honest thoughts and opinions. So, first off, I do want to talk about Troy Nash and Jacob Ramos. So this was a very good fight. First fight of the night. Great matchup. These guys were slugging it out. They were slugging it out. You saw some high IQ boxing mixed in there as well. I thought Troy Nash did a great job. I thought Jacob Ramos also did a good job. I think Troy Nash is going to be a guy who Zuffa really likes. But I do have one complaint. The scorecards in this I think they were a little wide. I think Jacob Ramos was in this fight a little more than what some of these scorecards said. There was a 59 to 55. I believe I wrote that down wrong. But anyways, there was two scorecards in that fight that I thought were a little bit wide. Yeah, I definitely think I wrote that down wrong. But I do think some of those scorecards were a little wide. I do think Troy Nash did come out with a victory. But, I mean, first fight of the night, we heard Dana White talking a lot of boxing judges, like, in the past. One thing that he hated was the very bad judging in boxing, which is a very known thing. It's a very known thing in the sport of boxing. The judging is very biased to certain fighters. It's a very bad look at times. Now, I'm not saying this was an incredibly bad look, because obviously it wasn't that much of a highly touted fight. So there's really no room to be biased here, because it was two younger undefeated guys. But I do think Jacob Ramos was a little bit closer in this fight than what the scorecards did say. So that was kind of a concern off the bat. Was Dana did kind of complain a lot about the boxing scorecard, and then we got a bad scorecard on the first fight of the night. But I think that was just, I mean, obviously every scorecard is not going to be perfect, and I think that was just a very weird situation there. I think that was just bad timing. But anyways, the next one is Robert Merriweather versus Carlos Correa, or Cesar Correa. I'm sorry. First off, Robert Merriweather. Robert Merriweather III is going to be a star in Zuffa boxing. He's going to be a guy that Zuffa boxing builds heavily around, I believe. I think that this is probably their first building block that they've seen. And I think this is a guy that Dana White's going to try and push. He's still very young, and he looked great out there. 10-0 now. Like I said, looked very good out there. Looked very good. I wouldn't even say it was a mismatch on paper, like when you're matchmaking. But, man, Robert Merriweather just completely outclassed Correa. And like I said, Merriweather looked very good in that fight, and I think this is a guy that you'll see a lot in the Zuffa boxing scene, and you'll start to hear this name grow a lot more because I think the Zuffa will do a good job at growing these fighters and stuff. So that's very that's something that I'd watch for is Robert Merriweather. Now next, Emiliano Cardenas and Marcus Harris. This is another pretty solid fight. You know, Marcus Harris started out pretty strong, which Emiliano Cardenas, he did start out a little slower, but I mean that was on purpose. You know, he was just trying to get a feel for what Marcus Harris was doing. Emiliano trained by Robert Garcia, who is also obviously one of the best trainers in the entire sport. So Emiliano does eventually come out with a victory. He ended up making it a pretty clear victory in the end, although Marcus Harris I'd say he was ahead in the first round or two, but then again, that's the first round or two. I think Emiliano won the rest. And yeah, Emiliano's another guy who I think I think they'll build around him. You know, I think this first event we kind of saw a lot of building blocks, so I'll probably mention that a lot. But yeah, I do think that Emiliano is going to be a guy that they build around. I think he has a pretty bright future. No, he looked very poised in there, looked very solid. There are some things to work on, but he's still pretty young. You know, if you look at him, he looks like he's 12 years old. Like he's completely not grown into his man body, like at all. So he's gonna get bigger. He's gonna get stronger. He was throwing some thudding shots in there. Now I think that power it's gonna eventually get a little bit better as he does grow into his man body. Because like I said, he still looks like he's 12 years old. But I'm a fan of Emiliano Cardenas, and I think that's a name to watch as well. Now the next one, Floyd Diaz and Gutierrez. I'm not even gonna attempt the first name. I'm terrible with names. Terrible with names. But anyways, Floyd Diaz. You remember him from Top Rank. He was a Top Rank prospect. He was a pretty highly touted Top Rank prospect, and they really pushed that agenda of Floyd Diaz being a protege of Floyd Mayweather at one time. So Floyd Diaz did have that name, Floyd Cash Flow Diaz, which kind of goes along with the Floyd Money Mayweather thing at one time. And man, Floyd Diaz, I'll be honest, he disappointed me in this one. I thought when I saw this fight scheduled, I saw that Floyd Diaz was back because you know he had a pretty long layoff because of the whole Top Rank network issue. And Gutierrez also took this fight on like a few weeks' notice, I believe. It was a short notice fight for Gutierrez, and I thought he performed pretty well to be against the former top prospect and to be, like I said, short notice fight. But Floyd Diaz, man, he just wasn't putting his punches together at all. You know, I think he could have put his punches together a lot more, and I think he could have got him out there. He hurt Gutierrez in round two. Seemed like Floyd Diaz was going to get the KO, and he just never really attacked, never really put pressure. After he rocked him, after he hurt him in that second round, you really saw Floyd Diaz just stop putting his punches together. He was just throwing one or two heavy shots, just hoping to get the knockout. And I think it was just a pretty bad game plan for Floyd Diaz. You know, I think he's a lot better than what he showed, and I think he is a guy that you'll want to watch with Zuffa because I do think he's a good fighter still and very high ceiling as well. But yeah, I mean, this is a guy to watch for. This is a guy to watch for, and I think it was mainly ring rust. I think he just showed his ring rust there. So that's just one takeaway from that one. Now, Omar Trinidad. Omar Trinidad, he went the distance. No, he got. Oh, yeah, okay. This is the dislocated shoulder one. Okay, so Max Ornelas and Omar Trinidad. Max Ornelas did get stopped because it was a referee stoppage because his shoulder was dislocated. So I mean, I don't really have much takeaways from this fight other than Ornelas was in the corner. It showed it on camera. His shoulder was very much out of place, and they popped it back into place while he was in the corner. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then he went back out for a round and redislocated it, and the ref called it. So that's really all I have for that one. But Omar Trinidad, was this the fight? Yeah, I think this is the fight where Ornelas got knocked down several times. I think. Yeah. So yeah, Max Ornelas did get knocked down several times. He couldn't take a punch straight to the face. You know, his punch resistance is not good. He would get straight back up, which, I mean, I guess it shows he has a chin. But man, he was getting dropped with everything. He was getting dropped with everything. He would get up, didn't really look hurt. or didn't really look hurt. I don't know. It was very, very weird. Very weird. But Omar Trinidad did get the KO due to referee stoppage. Now, fight of the night. Julian Rodriguez, Hammer Hands, and Kane Sandoval. So, Julian Rodriguez, I was a fan of him coming into this because I watched him at a Most Valuable Promotions event when I was there in LA watching it. He knocked out Avius Griffin, who was a new MVP signee at the time. And man, I thought Julian Rodriguez, I think that his presence and his attitude in the press conferences are great. I think that's great for building up fights. In that MVP event, he got into it with Jake Paul, which sparked a lot of eyeballs to Julian Rodriguez fight, where he went in as the underdog and knocked out Avius Griffin. And you saw it again. Kane Sandoval and Julian Rodriguez were really going at it in the press conference leading up to this fight and got a lot of eyeballs on this one. And Julian Rodriguez comes in as the underdog again and gets another one. So Julian Rodriguez, keep counting him out. He's going to keep coming through. I think Kane Sandoval is a very good guy, or a very good fighter. At first, I thought Julian Rodriguez. Well, first off, I do want to say Julian Rodriguez fought an absolutely outstanding fight. Kane Sandoval was applying heavy pressure at one time. It seemed like for a round or two, Julian Rodriguez was kind of getting affected by it. And then, man, he put together like a masterclass. It was a slugfest. He did kind of slack towards the end, so you did get to see him hit a lot. There's a picture up on social media of both of them in the hospital beside each other. I thought that was very awesome. But yeah, fight of the night here, man. If you haven't watched it, go check it out on Paramount Plus because this was a fight that you'll definitely want to go check out. So, Austin Deanda, I'll be honest, I didn't really watch this one. And Mizell Rodriguez, I think Deanda was a former military guy or current military guy. He ended to a doctor stoppage, and honestly, I didn't really see what happened in that one. But Callum Walsh and Carlos Ocampo, going into this fight, I kind of expected what happened. I kind of thought Callum Walsh would get a knockout, but Callum looked pretty. He looked okay. I don't think Callum is as high level of a fighter as they're going to try and push him to be. Carlos Ocampo is not very elite competition. He got knocked out in the first round by Tim Tszyu, got knocked out in the first round by Errol Spence. He was in a very solid fight with Fundora at one time and ultimately ended up coming short in that one as well. But yeah, I think Callum Walsh is kind of levels ahead of Ocampo, especially in this day and age. And yeah, I kind of expect him to go out and get the finish. It was a very weird fight. Very weird fight. That's all I'm going to say. But about the event itself, first off, the pacing was very quick. So Dana has talked about that. In most other promotions, boxing, you'll see one fight in, then there's a 20-minute break, then you got the next fight. This was one after the other. So I thought the pacing was very well, although it did last longer still. But I did think the pacing was very well, so Dana did stick up to that one. Also, I do want to mention Robert Merriweather. The Rick Owens boxing boots were pretty sick. So, Robert Merriweather, if you're watching this, the Rick Owens boots were sick. But anyway, I'm not a fan of the uniforms. Not a fan of the uniforms. I think one of my favorite things in boxing, I wouldn't say one of my favorite things, but something that every fight fan really likes to see is the creativity of each boxer, like each fighter, getting to really come out in their like custom gear and everything. It really shows the creativity, really shows they get to express themselves, basically, I would say. So I'm not a fan of the uniforms that they have to wear. Even the cornermen did have to wear uniforms, which I also wasn't a fan of that. It was very weird seeing Robert Garcia in a Zuffa boxing shirt. I'm just not used to seeing that. You usually see Robert Garcia in his certain attire, usually pretty much every single fight night in his Robert Garcia gym attire. But he was in Zuffa boxing gear at this time. But, if you're going to do uniforms, I'd say maybe add a little bit to it. I think they were a little bland, a little plain. I think a lot of people would probably agree with that. But then again, if you look at what UFC originally had, you saw some elevation to that as well. So if you either get rid of the uniforms or at least make the uniforms look a little better, I'm not here to complain about that. I'm just saying, just giving my thoughts. I don't think that's a big deal. Production, I thought production was very well. It's a lot better than what we see with all these other promotions on DAZN. I will say that. I think the production and the quality was much better than what we see on the zone from these other companies. So I think the production was very good. It was similar to UFC, but also different, so it didn't feel like you were watching a UFC event. I thought the venue was pretty cool. I did hear that Dana White is expanding the Apex to, I think, 1,100 people. I think there was like 300 people there yesterday, so it's gonna kind of be like a club show for a little bit, which I understand. It's prospect events for right now, and you're trying to build these guys up while you're just getting started fresh. Picking up Jairo Pataya was massive. F.A. Jogba has a fight coming up. Jairo Pataya does have a scheduled fight coming up with Zuffa. But yeah, man, I mean, not too many takeaways. I thought Dana did a pretty good job. For it to be the first event, I don't think it was as bad as what some people were saying. I thought the fights were good. I thought all the fights were pretty solid. There were only a few, like one or two, that I wasn't really a fan of. But most fights were solid. We got to see a lot of young guys really duke it out. Two young undefeated guys. So, I really like that. I really like that. I think ultimately there's a lot of hate going around because of fighter pay and stuff. But outside of that, if you're just a boxing fan and you're looking at the fights, you want to watch good fights, I think Zuffa Boxing is going to be a spot for that. Now, I do hope that Dana does let some guys unify titles. I'm very interested to see what goes on with the Zuffa belt. But anyways, we're not going to go too in-depth on Zuffa, just mainly this event. Overall, I thought it was a good event. I don't think it was as bad as what I see some people out there saying. Dana also said that they need some work. They have some work to do. So, we'll kind of see what happens there. So if you did enjoy this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you did consider subscribing to the channel. Lots of boxing content coming. We're going to break down pretty much every single fight. Or not break down, but we're going to predict and kind of recap every single fight that goes down, pretty much. Or every single card that goes down. So I greatly appreciate you guys who tune in, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.